Okay, great. So now I'd like to introduce our speaker tonight. Kristen Jacks is a financial educator, author, and the founder of Money in Your 20s. Kristen worked for Kiplinger's Personal Finance magazine and Mutual Funds magazine before becoming a writer and speaker. Her new book on investing is a lively and jargon free resource for young adults or anyone new to investing. Kristen is a graduate of Duke University. And with that, thank you for joining us tonight, Kristen. I'll let you take it away. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much. And thank you to Greenwich Library. They do such a great job of hosting really important programs. So thank you. Okay, everyone, welcome. Please put questions in the chat. But also, if you just have a burning question, you can unmute and just talk. That's totally fine. So we're kind of staying muted just to make sure there's no background noise. And especially if you have something to contribute, feel free to unmute and either ask a question or just add to the slides. So I've started with this slide just for you to take a minute and just kind of, do your own assessment of kind of like, where are you at with what you think college costs today? And do you think you have like, sort of this view that a lot of people start out with, at least, of, there's the flagship state university and it's going to be a relatively good deal. And then there's everything else in the private world that is just astronomical in cost. And, check it out. Is this kind of where your thinking is at? And certainly, if you just start your journey trying to figure out the cost of college and you go to the UConn website, you'll see, okay, in state, I'm going to be on the hook for $35,424. That's not totally all in. One thing you'll notice when you visit various websites is that it's hard to compare apples to apples sometimes. These are obviously the direct costs, like you will have housing and you'll have a food. Some schools, they'll say, oh, you might be a commuter, but where stores is, you're not going to be a commuter. You're going to have to be like in stores because it's just cow fields all around the university. So you don't want to be commuting there. So in any case, UConn, okay, 35,424. They're not showing me a few things. They're not showing me books. They're not showing me like the cost of going home for Thanksgiving and things like that. But to try to be consistent, for most of these slides, I'm showing tuition, housing, meal plan, maybe student fees, maybe books, because it just depended on how the colleges were showing it on their website. So you take this number and you realize there would be a little bit more because of the travel, personal items, right? Kids need like shampoo and all that other stuff. They need gas for a car, possibly, those things. But in any case, that doesn't seem like too terrifying a number to be UConn in state. But then your kid comes home and says, I just love Villanova. One of my friends went there, last year, can't say enough good things about it. Could we go visit? And you go to the Villanova website and you see the astronomical cost. And here they're actually adding some of these things like the personal supplies and transportation back and forth. But those are sort of minimal. I mean, what hits you right away is the tuition is $66,838. I mean, that's extraordinary. And then you still have to pay for the housing and the food and the books and all these things. So yeah, it can really seem like the world is this way. You either go to your flagship school in state or you're going to be facing overwhelming cost. Okay. The reality is much more complicated. Nobody likes complexity, but because it's complicated, there's a lot of good news, there's a lot of hope, and for the people who are smart and know how to work the system, there's really a lot of hope. So that's why Ron Lieber wrote this book. So tonight we are covering, this has just been such a gift. Ron's book has been such a gift to parents. I certainly used it. I have one in college. The Price You Pay for College, an entirely new roadmap for the biggest financial decision your family will ever make. I don't even think that's hyperbole, right? I mean, especially if your kid wants to go private and you're looking at least $300,000 in costs. It's pretty extraordinary. So Ron Lieber wrote this book. He's the Your Money columnist for the New York Times. He had written extensively about paying for college and saving for college. And this is, an over 300-page book. So he covers many, many topics, and he gets into sort of different siloed areas that we can't cover everything. Like if someone wants to go to a women's college, he has an entire chapter just on the benefits of single-sex college and things like that. But the big things that we could cover in an hour and a few minutes, maybe an hour and 15 minutes, is merit aid. That is his big gift, is teaching everybody about merit aid and really pulling the curtain back on a very, very secretive system where you can get $20,000 off the list price of a school even if you have absolutely no financial need. So how do people do that? That this is really the secret sauce is here. He also talks about financial aid, obviously. People are very unfamiliar with what the parameters might be and either worried that they couldn't possibly get aid or overconfident that they will, which when you live in a high income area and aid is so dependent on income, and there's no adjustment for geography, you can have kind of a nasty surprise. So he really goes into that. I threw in his section on sports scholarships just because Fairfield County the kids are so sporty, and a lot of the parents, spend a fortune developing their kids as athletes and traveling all over the place. And I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of people have the back of their head, not just that it would help in admissions time, but maybe it would help financially. And then there are just so many like hacks in the book that are just great to cover. And then there are some hiccups to consider, like, you really have to check your assumptions when you're doing this college process. I thought one hiccup, I would say, that really blew my mind, if you're thinking that a state school is such a great savings, Ron Lieber trots out research that shows if you have a STEM kid, so a kid that's going to be like, math and science and engineering and things like that, that it's very difficult to get the required courses in 4 years if you go to a state school. So this is very problematic. Sorry, Siobhan, are you going to do it letting people in? I'm just getting notices that there are people in the waiting room. Okay, I'll take that as a yeah. Okay, so in any case, one of the hiccups I thought was very noteworthy was if you have a kid that is a STEM kid, like math, science, engineering, and they're at a state university, research, and Ron Lieber does a great job with research. He trots out research that shows your kid only has a 50% chance of graduating in 4 years because they won't be able to get the courses. So you're great, if you have this great plan of like, I'll just stick with state school and that's how I'm going to save money, but you have to add on a 5th year and you didn't even think of that and it's not because your kid messed up or didn't hustle to get the classes. It's just impossible to get all the classes. So anyway, great stuff in this book. And we will cover it thoroughly. So who is Ron Lieber? So he's the Your Money columnist for the New York Times. He had previously worked at the Wall Street Journal. He went to Amherst College. He's a super smart guy. He's got great credentials. But beyond that, I just love Ron Lieber because he's so relatable, thorough, and passionate. So Ron Lieber, he was a financial aid kid, starting at an early age. He grew up in Chicago, went to a very nice private school. Then his parents got divorced and his dad lost his job. And all of a sudden, he and his family, they're just throwing themselves at the mercy of this private, K through 12 school saying, we can't pay, please don't throw us out. So this kind of stuff, paying for college, being able to afford it, is very personal to him. And then when it was time to go to Amherst, and he applied early to Amherst, but before he even knew to apply, he actually went kind of underground to find out more about financial aid. Because again, his parents definitely could not afford full freight. So he tells a really funny story. And I actually have some of these podcasts at the bottom. So if you're the kind of person who would rather listen to a podcast than read a book, you can go into your podcasts and just search Ron Lieber. And he went on like a podcast tour after he did this book. And he's just really interesting to listen to. And he tells the story about how, he was told, like, a guy knows a guy about financial aid, show up at this address, use the side door, bring $50 in cash, and you'll get your questions answered. This is a true story. You can hear him tell it on these podcasts. But basically, the guy who was an assistant director at Northwestern University in the financial aid office had a whole side hustle going off the books with people coming after work hours using the side door to find out how financial aid works. And the guy was true to his word, and he was certainly knew his business. And Ron Lieber got into first of all, knew to apply to Amherst. So it's like knowing which schools will give you money. And he got a great financial aid package. And, it's probably the best $50 cash that Ron Lieber ever spent. But this is what makes him so relatable, not just that he's had these experiences, but that he talks about them openly. In his book, he talks about when he graduated from Amherst, he literally hugged the financial aid officer who helped him stay there for 4 years. And he had tears in his eyes when he did it. So this is someone who really, understands the struggle is real. And he's also very thorough. So, just professionally, his research is amazing. I mean, he just quotes so many fantastic sources, and he really goes digging into data sets, for our benefit. And finally, he's passionate. I mean, he's kind of disgusted with the price of, especially private college is extraordinary. And for people to really, not be able to get an education or just be terrified of the cost, it really bothers them. And so he wanted to write a book that could give people hope, give them the best possible information, and help them beat the system. And like I said, these are just a sample of some of the podcasts that he was on. And to prepare for this, I like to listen to podcasts as well as read books. And you can't go wrong listening to him for an hour. You'll get sort of the bottom line on the book, and also just certainly you'll hear from someone who cares and who wants to see you succeed. So that's Ron Lieber. Now, before we just dive into all of his great information, I think it's really critical to understand the sticker price landscape of colleges before you go too far afield. So if you had a very kind of black and white view of its kind of, great or state, that was, I don't know where I got that phrase, but it was something I was thinking about when my older daughter was looking at college. I was like, oh, at these prices, there's only one way. It's great or state. Like could anyone ever even think of paying over $80,000 for a private college unless it's Yale? And I was lucky enough to talk to Ron Lieber about this, and he was like, "Oh, I love that line, great or state, but no, it's so much more than that. That really doesn't cover it because you don't totally. First of all, you have to understand the sticker price where you're starting from, and then you have to understand merit aid, which really turns the whole system upside down. So let's just make sure everybody is comfortable with sticker prices. Okay, by sticker price, I mean really the published price, that these schools say this is going to be the price. If you go to their website, they're going to say this is the tuition, this is the housing, this is the food plan. Okay, that's the sticker price. It's not what people pay. 89%, startling statistic from the book, 89% of families do not pay the published price. Only 11% of families pay the published price. So you're going to want to hear this. Okay, but let's look at the landscape. So we've got our flagship in-state, institution, UConn, and that would be under $40,000. We saw that, so that's like $35,000. Well, then if you just stay in state kind of locally, like regionally, then you've got like, say, Rhode Island University, and they are not going to charge you the out-of-state price. They are going to charge you a regional price, which is better than the out-of-state price. Then take like a Penn State, okay? So Penn State's further away. They actually are going to charge you the out-of-state price, but it's much lower than a private, a typical private school. Well, then you jump to the privates thinking, oh, well, now I'm jumping from like the 50,000s to the 80,000s, but it doesn't actually work that way. So there are a lot of very nice private colleges for a variety of reasons. They just don't charge a ton. And I'm going to show you some examples of Drew and Lawrence and Rhodes, where I literally just grabbed their costs from their websites. So the starting point is lower than what you might have feared. And that's really important because especially in the merit aid world where you don't know what you're going to end up with in terms of discounting, it's good to know that you're not starting from such a scary number. And it's also good because what if your kid, even gets like merit aid or a scholarship or whatever, but then really struggles to do well. And then you have to have the whole nervousness around, well, if my kid's a C student, I guess they're not going to give us good aid next year and things like that. So it's much better to be able to start with a lower price. That's the price for everybody. So hopefully this dispels a few myths. And then of course you have like these, over $80,000 schools. So let's just go through a few of these. Like, so here's, Rhode Island University, the state school, and they have their, state residents pay the least. Then there's out of state, but New England regional, right? So they're called something else. They're not even considered out of state international. They get all lumped in together, but they're New England regional, and that's a lower price. So no, okay. So at UConn we were at 35,000. Now at University of Rhode Island we're at 42,400. It's interesting, right? Then you go to Penn State and you don't have any regional advantage, and they just say, okay, you're either Pennsylvania resident or you're a non-resident. And now we're getting up, the numbers kind of going up, right? And it's going to 52,610. And again, I'm trying to compare apples to apples here. Not all the websites, make it that easy, but you would still have transportation costs. You would still have personal expenses, your shampoo and gas for your car if you have a car, things like that. You have books. But this is the tuition fees, and I think I don't know why they say one thing is tuition and one thing's fees, because when you actually have to pay it, and it's part of the cost, that these are the you must pay costs. So I'm showing tuition, fees, room and board, and then sometimes I show books if they just showed it that way, and that was the only way I could screenshot it. Okay, so now we're at 52,610. Well, I'm going to go back to our little visual here, and obviously the schools that are on top of the arrow are all public, right? So you can't even make the statement that public is better than private in terms of cost, because just to make everything really confusing, you have extremely expensive public universities. They are expensive for people who are out of state. So the University of Virginia is astronomically expensive. And also, they make their website really confusing, probably because they don't want to advertise that they're astronomically expensive. But the tuition alone, just tuition at UVA, if you're out of state, is 53,000. So I had this little greater state slogan when I first started this journey, and Ron Lieber was like, it's cute, but it's not accurate because UVA is no picnic. Now, below the line, below the arrow, we're talking about only private schools. And again, maybe it comes as a surprise. They're not all over $80,000. So let's find, here's Drew University in New Jersey. And, their tuition, housing, I sometimes I say housing, food, sometimes I say room and board, but their tuition, housing, food, fees, you're at 62,400, and they give merit aid, meaning they're part of this discounting system that is like really the big gift of Ron Lieber's book, is delving into all these discounts and who gets them and why and who gives them and how much and all these things. I mean, it's just amazing the research that he did. But even if you had to pay full freight at Drew University, you cap out at 62,400. That's great, because you have other schools that we saw Villanova was already up to in the 80s. So let's see. Okay, and Lawrence University, I have a soft spot for Lawrence. My whole family on my mother's side is from Wisconsin, and many, many, many of my relatives went to this nice small school, nice private small school in Appleton, Wisconsin, called Lawrence, and full freight. you're at 67,000 and change, right? So, and that's before any discounting. And Lawrence gives almost everybody merit aid. So it's good to know they're not, you're not always starting at over $80,000. And then Rhodes College, I can't remember why I threw that in there. It was a cute school. I found out about it from someone. It's in Memphis, Tennessee. It's got a beautiful campus. It looks like Duke University, which is where I went. I mean, it really, like, I did a double take. And beautiful campus. Memphis, not the safest town in the world, but I'm sure they have good security on campus. And again, it's 70,700. So okay, starting costs, and they give merit aid. So you're starting to sense a theme here. And then finally, you do have, like, sometimes your kid will mention a school and you'll go to the website and whoop, there it is. It's in, the 80,000s and up, because that's definitely happening. But at least there is a range, and there are schools, private schools, that start less. And there are public schools that are just as expensive as private schools if you're coming from out of state. So it's complicated. All right, so hopefully now you have kind of this sticker price landscape. So everybody should, if they're going to really get the most out of this, webinar and also Ron's book, it's to really understand where we're starting from. This is the sticker price landscape. I'm just going to check the chat one quick second because I see there are two messages. What was the first one? Book available to borrow through Greenwich Library. Oh, right, of course. You can get Ron's book through Greenwich Library. Okay, great. All right, so now let's get to why we all signed on. The price you pay for college, Ron Lieber, his gift to everybody is telling you what merit aid is, who's offering it, how much you can get, and it is fascinating. It is fascinating. So here's an example. We had just, looked at the price of Lawrence University. And then what's interesting is when you go on these websites, very often you will notice this. Schools do not, you go to the website and you figure admissions, click admissions, and then you would think like the next window would be like tuition. They don't do that. These schools do not want you to see that sticker price first. What they want you to see first is, we'll help you. We'll make it affordable. Don't panic. We're here. So, Lawrence University, before you got to see even what it costs, they're like, we are a partner in your success, and we're going to offer scholarships and financial aid. Okay, so scholarships, back in the day when I was looking at scholarships, when I was younger, scholarships were very specific and they had a name, right? They might be something like even today, like Washington and Lee has, gives away 20 full rides, and they call the scholarship something specific, and you're really, really lucky if you can get it. So scholarships used to be kind of more narrow and harder to get. Well, now we're just using that scholarship word all the time. This is what the merit aid world is. It's this discounting world. So you're going to hear the word scholarship all the time, and it just means, you might get a discount. So at Lawrence University, they say they work hard to make the scholarship and financial aid process as straightforward as possible so that you have the resources you need to finance your education. And with 99% of our students receiving some form of aid, right? There you go. This is probably the first thing that is so shocking in Ron's book is how many schools, it's like everybody gets a trophy, right? So really, what is going on with those sticker prices if everyone's going to get a deal, and has nothing to do with your demonstrated need? Nothing. Has a lot to do with how much the university wants your kid. But here you go, Lawrence University. They show you this, you can eventually get to the sticker price, but first they're going to tell you that 99% of the students don't pay the prices that they're showing you on their website. Okay. Tulane right on their website before they show you how much it costs, offers both merit and need-based aid, and all students are going to be considered. There's nothing you have to do separately. There's no extra application. So, okay, this is what people start to see. Before they actually show you the cost, they start saying, don't panic. We have a system for discounting this cost. Okay, so what is merit aid? Ron Lieber will tell you. I mean, it's great to hear the word scholarship. it's great to get a letter saying your kid is so excellent that we're going to give your kid a $20,000 scholarship, and they will call it a scholarship. But merit aid is truly a discounting system. It is a discounting system. You start with the sticker price. The school wants to be able to control and sort of entice students by saying, you're so fabulous, you get a scholarship. And they're knocking down, these extraordinary tuition prices, and they're making the parents feel much better. Even if the parents have the ability to pay the full amount, which is saying a lot. Ron Lieber talks a lot about there's a big difference between ability and willingness, right? So, maybe you're okay with UConn, and maybe you're okay with Penn State, at 52,000, but now you start getting to like a Denison that's, in the 80,000s, and you're like, well, I don't know. Like, I don't know if I want to pay that for Denison. Well, don't worry, because Denison is really good about giving merit aid. So, and they know that people don't necessarily have that willingness, even if they have the ability. So merit aid is a discounting system, and it is used by a ton of schools, a ton of private schools, also public schools, less money at public schools. But if you had this preconception like I did of greater state, which it's like, well, we have to do, you would only ever pay 80,000 plus per year for a Yale or a Vanderbilt or a Harvard or something, if, even if you ever consider it. But I was, that was when I knew nothing, that's where I was starting. I just had kind of greater state in my mind. And it was so great to talk to Ron Lieber in person. That was such a treat. And have him kind of laugh at that greater state. But then also say, actually, there's a lot more going on. And that's what I got out of his book, that it was like, oh, my initial impression of like, you'd either pay in the 80s per year for great, or you send your kid to a state school, because you can't pay, $85,000 a year for something that isn't in the top 100, selective schools. And that's really where merit aid comes in. So the top schools don't have to offer it, and they don't. Some do. UChicago does, but mostly they don't. But don't panic, because as you'll see later on, a lot of the top schools are some of the most highly resourced schools, have some of the best endowments. And so they actually give fantastic financial aid. And they have a very different view of what is demonstrated need. So I hope you're not confused yet. But I'm going to back up what I'm saying. I'm going to remind you, and we'll get to the financial aid section. But your first stop is merit aid, and all the schools that are using it. And a little bit of background. So Ron Lieber, in his book, he kind of talks about how it was the Ohio schools first all started to compete with each other and sort of like knock money off of their sticker price to entice students to come to their university. And it worked. And, once you start discounting and couponing and things like that, it takes on a life of its own. So schools like Oberlin and Ohio Wesleyan, and they all started discounting. And now it's just rampant. I mean, it's just kind of everywhere you look, there's discounting. And the purpose, so like, let's take some really popular schools like Tulane and Northeastern. Those schools really wanted to rise up the ranks, the US News ranks, and just people's perceptions and things like that. And they really have, those schools have really come very far. They've become much, much more selective. They've been able to recruit really, fantastic students. Well, what happened was that's how they used, starting at their very, very high sticker price. They're both in the 80,000s range. For students that they wanted, looking at grades and test scores, they're like, you pay $25,000 less. And that makes the whole family feel good. And it also becomes more affordable. And it absolutely raised those schools up. So here are some of the points that Ron makes, right? Grades and test scores really matter, right? I mean, a lot of these schools, they are using this discounting to lure top students away from like the 50 most selective colleges, right? They're just, or whatever school they're competing with. Even like University of Chicago gives merit aid to make sure you don't end up at Yale or Harvard or Princeton. So it's definitely, it's a way to get a student's attention and get the family's attention, make them feel fantastic that they're getting a scholarship, but also just make it more affordable. I mean, the scary thing is if you're at one of these schools, that if you're not going to get any help, I mean, that's an extraordinary expense, right? So you're almost at you're hugging $400,000 a year. It's just extraordinary. Okay, so merit aids, it's a discounting system, very much based on grades and test scores, depending on the institution too. So some schools, and Ron mentions which schools in the book, are so into the grades and test scores that they will actually show you on their website, if you have this GPA and these, whether it's an ACT score or an SAT score, if you have, then you kind of like look across a chart to find out what kind of a discount you can expect. I mean, some schools are that blunt. Other schools are purposely vague. So like, for example, getting back to Lawrence University, it just says like Lawrence is a unique community, right? And they have diverse interests and multiple talents. And, that's, so they're being very vague about why they might award merit aid. And Ron Lieber does a great job of explaining that they really want to keep their options open, because if they need, like, in their orchestra, they need more violinists, they're not going to tell you in advance if they need a better lacrosse player, if they need a female swimmer, if they, year to year, the schools don't want to say like kind of this is how our merit aid works. They like to give themselves a lot of wiggle room to figure out like, well, what are we missing? Who else do we need to attract? And then they can do the discounting to attract those people. All right, so it's the discounting system. It's very dependent on grades and test scores. It's purposely vague, and it's designed to lure students away from the top 50 universities. And definitely Tulane and Northeastern are some of the most well-known that have done this, on a big scale and really like, and risen through the ranks because of it. So another part of the book that is really interesting and probably scares the heck out of child psychologists is Ron Lieber. Since so much of this is based on your child's excellence, should you tell your kid how big a deal their excellence is in terms of being able to afford college, right? Especially just grades and just maybe not even test scores yet, but just grades, right? So Ron Lieber got into a lot of trouble when he wrote in his column, his Your Money column for the New York Times, that it's time to tell the title was something like, it's time to tell your 8th grader that their grades could cost $100,000, could save $100,000, because it's true, right? So there's a whole discussion in the book of, is it good parenting? Is it bad parenting? If you let your kid know before they get to high school how incredibly important their grades and their test scores are going to be in terms of being able to afford college, right? And I guess this is every family's decision, because if you can afford it no matter what, and you just want to protect your child from any kind of stress, that's certainly an option. Ron Lieber is very much in the other direction, which is kids should not be treated like they're fragile. They should be given a shot of determining like their future. So if they're in love with some of these, very pricey schools like a Villanova, it's like, well, then you got to help me out here. If you don't get those grades and test scores, you're not going to get merit aid, and you're also not going to be that desirable to the highly, highly resourced schools that can give you a really good, a better than normal financial aid package. So, and we'll get to the financial aid part. So that's for you to decide. But it's another part of the book is really like, what are you saying to your kid? What's your family strategy? How honest should you be? And, how much pressure is too much pressure? All right. So financial aid, not a great topic, but maybe you'll be surprised. One thing I learned, I did not know. I mean, I've certainly seen net price calculators on different websites. I had no idea that schools are required to have them. So the government has definitely gotten involved, and they want to help parents as consumers um, try to understand what this school, these schools that have incredibly high sticker prices. It's just so odd because the system is not straightforward. It's not transparent. So how often do you go shopping for something that's super expensive and you can't really understand what it's actually going to eventually cost you? So it can be a very frustrating system. So at least the government has said, you know what, you have to, before you get their FAFSA form, before you get their paperwork, you have to give them something on your website where if they input some information, you could give them some sense of their net cost, right? So forget the sticker price. These are the savings that you're going to get. And so you have to have a net price calculator. There are net price calculators that ask like 50 questions, right? They can be really, really, really time consuming. And the more accurate an assessment you want, the more questions you're going to want to answer. But in addition to the net price calculator, a lot of schools now also have sort of like this quick calculator that's, quickly tell me, do you own your home? Do you have equity in your home? What is your income? What's your retirement savings? What's your non-retirement savings? What kind of money does your kid have? And it's quick, quick, quick. It really is like 3 minutes, right? So schools are required to do this, to have the net price calculator. Some have like the quick 3-minute one. Some just have the very complicated one. But it is supposed to give you some sense of what the school can do for you. Now, I did a lot of these leading up to this webinar to prepare for this webinar, and I was amazed at some of the differences. So Yale is a highly resourced school, obviously, and incredible endowment. So just for fun, I threw in some pretty like aggressive financials, right? I said, I didn't know what was going to happen, but I was like, what if I say I live in a house that's valued at $1.4 million and I have $400,000 in equity and my income is 200,000, my retirement savings is 600,000, my non-retirement savings is 200,000. I mean, for a lot of schools, these kinds of numbers, they'd be like, yeah, you're not going to get much. So I was amazed that Yale was like, oh, well, now your parent, and student contribution shrinks down to 55,100 from, the upper 80,000 that it was. So I was really, really surprised. And this is also the average. They're saying it might go as low as 40,400, or once we do more digging and, we find out more about assets and things like that, maybe you're going to be higher. But this seemed like a pretty generous thing for, especially for having so many assets. And again, it's really like highly resourced schools, right? So Rice University, again, like has a fantastic endowment, and they go out of their way to advertise to people that, even if you're in a family that's earning $200,000 a year, your tuition will only be half, right? So a lot of people have fears that if they have any kind of income, they're just going to get slammed. And that's not necessarily true. I was very, very surprised. But again, these are, Yale and Rice are two very, very highly resourced schools. But it pays to go to their website and, but make sure you keep detailed notes of the assumptions that you put in, because maybe you don't want to be too, you don't even leave your name or say anything yet, but you just want to test the system. You're going to want to write down, well, what did I say my income was, and what did I say my assets were, and what were my assumptions, and then be comparing your assumptions across the different school websites. And then, and again, here's this affordability at Vanderbilt. I thought it was amazing. They said that not only are they going to meet every student's demonstrated need, they will do it without loans. So not a lot of schools make that promise. I was listening to a podcast with a financial aid officer at Emory, and he was very proud that their school had just reached that level, that they're finally going to say, we're going to get you there and you won't have to take out loans. So I think, this is a hopeful idea. I mean, a lot of people go into this thinking, this is going to be terrible. We're going to have to, mortgage, get a second mortgage on the house. And so maybe not. Okay, now let's look at schools that are not highly resourced, right? So I'm not going to mention which school this was. I don't know if it's in the fine print here. But a nice private school, good private college, but not highly resourced, right? Not a great endowment, not super selective competitive, not a place where you'd have a lot of families dying to pay full freight just because they were so thankful their kid got in. So you start to see under these scenarios, when I was plugging in, the parents' total assets, once the assets started to get higher, it's kind of like, the help evaporated, right? So it's so interesting to me that who gets help, really changes from school to school. So that's something to keep in mind. And assets and income are really the big drivers. I'm sorry that this slide is like so many numbers and so many, it's kind of hard to read, but you just get down to the bottom and it's like, I basically had, very similar assumptions, but on one side, I put in $150,000 in assets for the family. On the other side, I put $500,000. And it's like, oh, well, if you've got a lot of money saved, you're on your own. Good luck. Okay, so tackling the FAFSA. So, obviously schools are different. The highly resourced schools can help you more, but no matter what, if you want financial aid, any kind of financial aid, you have to fill out the FAFSA. So the FAFSA is the free application for federal student aid. And before you can even fill it out, you have to get an FSA ID. So the idea is that the parents have an ID number, the student has an ID number, all of this is happening online. And the best way to explain it, I mean, if it were me, I would just go to YouTube. So I'm going to try to do that now. Hopefully I won't like disconnect everybody. But I just think, especially with younger, with kids, it's so great to just show them the videos if you can, to make it more straightforward. So let's see. Siobhan, can you still see, can you see what I'm doing here? I hope I didn't lose everybody. Or somebody, if you can't see me going to YouTube, tell me now.
Yeah.
I'll put it in the.
No,
Sorry, what?
It looks fine. Yeah, we're on YouTube with you.
Oh, okay, great. So let's go to federal student aid. All right, so I'm on YouTube and federal student aid has its own channel, right? And it has so many interesting videos. I mean, so much has been written about income-driven repayment plans. Like when you're on the other side of this, is it really true if you have student loans that, you don't just have to pay them off in 10 years, you can have them assess what your income is and you only pay based on what your income is. And then after 20 years, your loans get 20 to 25, your loans get forgiven. I mean, this is all really, really fascinating stuff. But in here, you scroll down and you've got the whole FAFSA section. And I just think it is so much easier to just take the time. We're not going to watch a bunch of videos, but at least one.
We can't hear the sound though. At least
Oh, you
I
can't?
No.
Can you hear it now?
Oh.
No?
Not barely.
Now?
No, it's all broken up and very quiet.
All right. Okay, so as you can see on YouTube, you actually don't even have to remember student aid. In the search bar on YouTube, if you just put in FAFSA, it's going to take you to the student aid. And you can see that there are all of those videos, like what the FAFSA form is, who needs to fill it out. Very interestingly, step parents, they're now starting to ask step parents to fill it out. So the FAFSA form was dramatically changed. And now it's much more supposedly user-friendly. But On top of this change, I think it's pretty interesting that they're asking step parents to fill out these forms, because my understanding is that that is very unusual, or that is new. So it's kind of frankly a little creepy to me, that as people are trying to like figure out their lives, like what if, your ex-spouse is about to marry someone now, and you think it might jeopardize your child's financial aid because that person is wealthy, but that person hasn't said a word about whether or not they would help your child pay for college. So it's really, really important to understand like how the law works and how FAFSA works. And I'm sorry to say that I just don't know. I was so surprised to see that step parents are now like part of the equation. Let me just look in maybe this person in the chat knows. Oh, okay, thank you. Do I want you to see my entire desktop? Do I want you to see that I don't organize my desktop the way normal people do? Yeah. Okay, so tackling the FAFSA. So if it were me, I would go to YouTube and I would watch all those hand-holding videos about like what the FAFSA is, who's going to need to do what. And then they're going to tell you that like the first thing that you need to do before you even can get anywhere near the online form is get this, federal student aid ID. And if you don't have a social security number, you can still get the federal student aid ID, and they walk you through how. So I just think it's YouTube to the rescue. And, does anybody have any questions though? It's great that some people are starting to use the chat. I love that. So if anything is confusing, or you want me to go back, or you want me to say anything further, or there's a different slide that you'd like to see, just put it in the chat and I will pick it up. Okay. All righty. All right, so sports scholarships. Very, very sporty town. Fairfield County in general, very, very sporty county. I don't know how old for the listeners out there, I don't know how old your kids are, but I have spent so much of my life, weekends, evenings, holidays, with sports. My daughter is a very competitive diver. She's on the high school team. So my older one's already in college. My younger one is at Greenwich High School, and she's on the diving team. And before that, she was a competitive gymnast. So we are definitely a sports family, whether we like flying to Florida next week or not. But we will, because it's diving nationals. So with all of this time and money spent on sports, Ron Lieber makes the guess that it's not, it's for the love of the game, sure, but families must be tying it into the college process. And I would say that, from all the different families that I know, it's at least come up as, boy, it sure could help, should help in admissions, that, if your kid is, pulling down the grades and doing well, and then also showing that they can be like, an award-winning swimmer, or a really great tennis player, or a fantastic lacrosse player, like that's got to count for something, right? But then on the financial side, it's like maybe it's getting you pushed through the admissions process, and certainly that's really valuable. But does it get you any money? And that's when it gets really confusing. So I liked the way that Ron put this in the chapter heading of chapter 24, athletic scholarships for the few, and probably not in fall or at your first choice school. So you get where he's going with this. It's not a slam dunk. So when he started researching, like, how does this work? Who gets what amount of money? He just was so surprised on so many levels, because there'll be sports where there are only a handful of full ride, scholarships available. And it's at the discretion of the coaches, and you can't really predict from year to year, because it depends on, what the team is missing and what the team needs. There are situations where the coaches are trying to sniff out the financial viability of the family, because maybe coaches have like a pool of money and they have to allocate it very carefully. So they're like, maybe this family, they're just using the sport for the admissions piece and they don't really need it for the financial piece. So there's definitely not as much money there as people assume. Coaches are probably playing, a little bit poker faced because they have to be very, if you don't need the money, they don't want to give it to you. So they want to use it for the kid that won't come unless they can get the financial relief. So it's a really, if you are at all interested in this sports angle, I would, one, get your hands on the book and read that chapter. But two, Ron Lieber also in his podcasts, he went on specifically sports podcast sites and talked very in depth about this topic. So, because there's such a difference between like what they do for the tennis players versus what they do for the basketball players and what they do for the women versus the men and things like that. So if you want to drill down, I would listen to those podcasts or I would read this chapter, but it's definitely not, it can really help with admissions. He acknowledges that, but can you get the money that you want and can you get it from the school that you want is really quite a puzzle, and it's not straightforward and it's usually not that great an outcome. So if you're banking on that, you're definitely going to want to find out more about merit aid because the merit aid doesn't come from the coaches. So you can see how we're circling back to the merit aid. This is kind of coming up over and over again. Okay, and then just kind of like the hacks and the hiccups where he's so good at sort of calling out certain things and doing certain research. And I thought, like, I don't know if you would call this a hack, but when you start to look at these like sort of highly selective colleges that are super, super expensive, and say you won't under any circumstances, be able to get any kind of financial aid, right? And say you won't, they don't have merit aid, right? So the highly selective ones mostly don't. I mean, U Chicago is an exception. Okay, now you're on the hook for an enormous amount of money. And he spends a lot of time delving into value. So say you're not going to get any help and the price tag is just shocking. Now you have to really get into your values. And the way he does that, I think is so interesting. He's like, do you really value like prestige, right? Where do you see your kid going? What kind of like, if you really, he gives such incredible research, like sort of this prestigious lifestyle of if you wanted to be an investment banker, or your kid, obviously, if you want your kid to be a top consultant, if you want your kid to be an entrepreneur that gets venture capital money, right? I mean, he really takes the time to do this and look at the research of like, who gets those jobs? Who has those types of outcomes, right? Those high prestige outcomes. And the research was kind of shocking to me and also very interesting. So if you're just talking about, ending up in politics and becoming a congressperson, or ending up in business and working your way to the CEO, there's plenty of research that says you do not have to go to the ultra elite school. However, if you want to be a consultant, or you want to get venture capital money as an entrepreneur, or you want to be an investment banker, there's research that shows that there are only about 40 colleges that people who end up in those positions, they come from like the same 40 colleges. Obviously on the, investment banking and consulting side, it's a recruiting issue, right? I mean, these top tier, or just basically any investment bank or any big consulting outfit, they're going to go, to the Princetons and the Harvards and the Yales and the things like that. And you have to decide, okay, am I playing that game? Because even with all the resources that those schools have, if you are very affluent, if you have a high income, if you have a lot of assets, you will not get any money off. So the whole merit thing disappears. And so there's, a small number of families that are really facing that they're going to have to pay $85,000 a year for these schools. And, is it worth it if you know that your kid wants to be a teacher? or wants to be a doctor. I mean, you don't have to go to the best school, or I don't want to say best, that's such a value judgment because there's so many fantastic schools, but he gets into, with research, really like, I think that the research was something along the lines of like, there are these 40 top schools. I think he expanded it to 45. And he's like, here are these top, most selective 45 schools that have the best, that recruit the best and the brightest. And you basically have to go to one of those if you're going to want to go down this very prestigious path. However, if you're just going to go down the politics path, you don't have to. If you're going to go down the like work my way up a business and become a CEO, you don't have to. Plenty of CEOs are, just from their flagship state school or whatever. So I think that's just there's so many parts of this book that are just fascinating in terms of the research that he's drilled down to that can help parents. On the hiccup side, some people joined us late, so they didn't hear about this in the beginning, but I definitely want to make sure that everybody knows that one of the biggest hiccups that he identifies is that if your kid is a STEM kid and your plan is to use like a state school, either just like the state school or because it's more affordable, the affordability piece really changes because state schools cannot get your kid graduated in 4 years. Only 50% of the STEM kids that start graduate in 4 years because they cannot get all the classes that they need. I think that was a shocking thing to learn in this book. And he always backs this up with research. So this is not just his opinion. So this book is going to show you like these great hacks and also these hiccups. And it's just so incredibly well researched. I just want to say there's one thing in the chat. I just want to see what that is. All right, Kristen, does Ron's book discuss some financial planning tools that parents should consider, such as creation of trusts, funding 529 plans to improve the chances of their child getting some sort of financial aid or scholarships? Well, okay, so you're saying two different things there, but that's a great question. And so actually, let's just move right on to that. So let's move on to this is really, so there's the financial aid piece, right? But then there's the whole saving for college piece. And he does, I wasn't really sure how much time we would have. I think because we've had fewer questions than I was expecting, we've actually blown through the slides pretty well. Let me just take one quick peek. Okay, yeah, great. Okay, so there's merit aid, there's financial aid, and then there's the whole thing, now if you're listening and your kids are younger, is like, how much should you be saving? Should you be saving? So one of the things that he debunks is this idea of like, don't bother to save because then you won't get financial aid. That is not true. Hopefully, if you noticed on these slides, these different assumptions that I plugged in for the different net price calculators on the different websites, the different school websites, you can see that like I threw down a lot of assets, right? That there were a lot of savings. And certainly if you only have like $150,000 saved, you are fine, and then depending on the highly resourced schools, I was up at like 200,000, 400,000, and it was still fine. So, always save money. It's horrible to face this process without any money saved. So he definitely says, please, please, please save. He talks about 529 plans specifically. He talks about the bad reputation they had, that they no longer deserve, right? So 529 plans, they're a tax sheltered savings vehicle, right? So if you put money in there, on the federal level, you're not getting a tax deduction right away. Like, so you're putting in after tax dollars, but you're allowing your money to grow tax free. And the 529, it's called that just because that's the area of the tax code that created it, that refers to these college savings plans. And then depending on where you live, like in Connecticut, we all get the tax deduction by contributing. So you will get a deduction on your state tax for contributing to a 529 plan. And it's more than 30 states that offer a deduction at the state level. And then the criticisms of the 529, the bad reputation of the 529 had to do with excessively high investing fees, which always happens, right? I mean, it's like when products first come out, just be very wary of what the fees might be. So I also run the investing discussion group for Greenwich Library, and our next session on May 14th is about ETFs. Now, ETFs have grown in popularity. They've outpaced mutual funds now for getting dollars. So it's like people seem to think that ETFs basically are mutual funds that can be traded on the exchange. It's more complicated than that. But our whole next session is about ETFs. And now that ETFs have become popular and there are companies rolling out with themes that are ETF themes, and but when you look under the hood, it's like you're getting charged so many, just really high fees for something that is so easily replicated on just a typical mutual fund for much less cost. So the old 2529 plans, when they first rolled out, had excessively high fees. That's mostly been corrected. But certainly check what you're going to be charged. And they also had very limited investment options. So it's just kind of a double whammy. Ron says that, in most scenarios, in most cases, those criticisms are no longer warranted. So you can find a good 529 plan with, reasonable fees and a good selection of investments. And you definitely should save. He also, he has, maybe this would be an unpleasant conversation, but in his book, he gives actually a script of what you could say to your parent, the grandparent of your child, about like how they could help you by setting up a 529 plan or helping you contribute to the one you have and things like that. So he really leaves no stone unturned. Does he talk about trusts? He talks about, this is very old school, and I'm not going to remember what it's called, but he was saying like, oh, you're going to do the 529 plan, but your parents are going to tell you really should have done this like uniform gift to minors, such and such, because that's the way they did it. And he explains like how that's kind of like old fashioned and not as good, and why you want to do the 529 and how to tell your parents like you got this and this is the better one. I don't think he talks about any kind of other trust, but the uniform gift to minors was something that he definitely talked about as that's old school and you want to do 529 instead. He also talks about saving just in a regular brokerage account, and the pros and cons of that. I would just add, I'm always on the lookout for some dream stock, which, if you really take your time and you're really a very good stock picker, maybe you would pick something and not even have that big an investment, but you just let it run, right? That's not something you can do inside a 529 plan, obviously. So for the people who, it's interesting to them, maybe they're in the financial world, maybe they see, IPOs and things like that. I am a value investor, so this wouldn't be any of the high tech IPOs or anything that rolls out and is really expensive. But in 2021, we had, between the IPOs and the SPACs, we had a lot of new companies come to the market, and they've since crashed. I mean, really crashed. There are a lot of stocks out there that are trading for like $1, $2, whatever. Well, if any of those companies survive, I mean, I should actually add a disclaimer, like never ever buy any stock that I am mentioning right now. I'm not giving specific advice. I'm trying to talk like in as an example of an idea or a theme. So if you personally know stocks, you personally look at them, say you looked at Rent the Runway and you saw that it had this incredible debut and now it's crashed and burned, and it's a fraction of what it once was. Whatever, you invest $1,000 in it and it rebounds and it comes back. Those are the kinds of things that you can do on the side, just in a regular brokerage account. And it would be a great use, if it takes off, for college savings. Let me take a quick look at the chat again. Okay, what are we talking about in terms of grades and scores necessary for merit aid? By the way, thank you for all of this, very helpful. Oh, great, you're welcome. We're talking about really good grades and test scores for the highly selective schools, no question. Oh, well, okay, let me forget my admissions piece here. So I'm just talking financially. So the merit aid schools, like, at Tulane, Northeastern, Denison, Oberlin, Kenyon, Connecticut College. I mean, there are so many really good schools that throw merit aid at kids. But as you can imagine, you're competing, they're going to throw money at the kid because that kid has the ability to go to a much more selective school, right? So those are the kids that get the most merit aid. So, um, I'm trying to think if Ron Lieber said anything specific. He never said like it would have to be above 1400. He never said any of that. And in fact, for certain schools, I think it was the University of Alabama, certain kind of mid-tier state schools, it was definitely not, it was, lights out. You didn't have to be in like the top 5% of your class or anything. So I hope that answers your question. But he didn't say, he didn't say it had to be straight A's. He didn't say it had to be 1400. I have, so I had an admissions person at Duke tell me in all seriousness that if my daughter didn't break 1500 on her SATs, she was not really like a great candidate for Duke. So it's extraordinary to me how tough it is out there at these ultra elite schools. But in this merit aid world where it's like, these schools that are just a notch under those top 50, it's not nearly that terrifying. I don't know that I can be more specific, but I love the questions. So please keep the questions coming and please save. He definitely has a huge part of his book where he's like, just save. You need to save. Okay. Any more questions? All right. Well, we're at 8:07. And we can definitely go another 10, 15 minutes. If you're thinking of questions, you can unmute. I'm just going to go to, okay. I love this book, right? And I just checked today and it's $11.39 on Amazon. Now, my copy has so many underlines, so many stars in the margins, so many notes in the margins, right? I'm telling you, this is the best $11.39 you will spend. I would get this book because I couldn't possibly cover all of the different things that he talks about. I mean, I'm not sure. I think there's a whole mental health piece that actually is very interesting for parents to read in terms of college presidents saying it's one of the most challenging things they are facing. Kids coming to school now, with mental health issues, like in some schools, it's like a quarter of the students are on some kind of a mental health plan, and parents are making an assumption that that they can hand off their child to the school and that the school will be sort of on top of that, right? So Ron Lieber, he doesn't just talk about like what schools cost, but it's also like, what assumptions are you making? Are you assuming that if your kid is on medication and maybe like really might go off the rails if they're too independent, are you assuming that the college is on top of that? And he's like, don't make that assumption. That's something you have to really, really investigate. He also talks about, I want to just find this one. Oh, where is it? There's just such a treasure trove. It's hard to know what people might be thinking and what they might be interested in. But in chapter 21, in terms of like a hack gone wrong, the people who thought that spending a year or two at community college and then transferring to a more expensive school, he talks about how often that fails. And he uses research. So if part of your plan, if part of your hack is start at community college, get some of the coursework, the basic coursework out of the way, maybe save yourself like a full year of college. He talks about how rarely that works, and it's for a variety of reasons. But even the idea that you can transfer, that you can take a course and the college will accept it, it's very hit or miss. So I obviously I just love the book. I can't say enough good things about it. I'm looking at the table of contents, and there, some things are very narrow. If you want to do, ROTC, like how much will the military pay for? How much will, how far ahead can you get with that? Let's see. Career. What about career counseling? Like if you're going to pay the big dollars, are you doing that because you think that the really expensive schools must have fantastic career counseling? Again, he's like, check your assumptions, right? That's something that you would have to really, really investigate. Some schools have great career counseling, like College of Worcester. He happens to love College of Worcester in this book, but he talks about how like even if you go to their website, they're like right in the beginning, they're like, we are going to help you create a career, right? And they're going to help you do like a capstone project, and they're going to help you network. And then there are schools like in Minnesota that actually take you, like guarantee you an internships and all these things. And he's like, but you have to know going in, are you paying the top dollar because you are assuming that schools have certain offerings that they're gonna help your kid get a job. And he's like, there are college presidents that say like the better the school, the worse the career counseling. They almost think of it as a badge of honor, that they're just kind of like very thoughtful places that don't get into the vocational world, right? So again, treasure trove, fantastic resource. I loved it. I hope you love it. If you think of a question after this, I'm Kristen Jacks, kjacks at moneyinyour20s.com. And one thing I did want to mention in my book, I bonds. So my book is my most recent book is an introduction to investing. So my first book was Money in Your 20s. This is my second book that's really meant to sort of capture that college student who's graduating and going to get their first 401k. The book opens with a fictitious person reading their 401k menu. And of course, they don't understand any of the offerings, because I don't know if you've ever read a 401k menu, but if you have no exposure to investing, it's like the JP Morgan small cap value fund, the Invesco high yield fund. I mean, all these things that are completely baffling to young people. So my book kind of walks them through, can at least get them through their 401k offerings. But in another section, I talk about, I think bonds are so underappreciated, which is surprising, because we're with interest rates up, like bonds are now a thing. They're now like a great savings vehicle. And I bonds in particular, if you buy an I bond, it basically, it's almost like having it inside a 529 plan. So when you buy an I bond, a savings bond from the United States government, it grows tax-free. So it's kind of compounding, and you're not paying any taxes. And then depending on your income, any increase in value of your I bond, when your kids go to school, you can use the money that you made on your I bond to pay for college expenses, and then you never pay taxes on the money. There's so many things that hacks that people just don't know. But that only applies, you have to be under the income limit. So that might be a little problematic for Greenwich. But again, these are just great resources to keep in mind. Let me just check the chat. Will your charts be made available? I think what you mean is like these slides. Like I am happy to give Siobhan, you could either email me, kjacks at moneyinyour20s.com, and I'll send you the slides, or I can give them to Siobhan. I don't know, Siobhan, would you rather they go through you? I'm happy to share the slides.
If you want to send them to me, I can send them to everybody that's in attendance.
Oh, just blast it out?
Yeah, if you want to do that. Otherwise,
that's great. Yeah. Then people don't have to make a specific request. So yes, the answer is yes. Okay, Siobhan, do you have any questions? You have 2 children.
I do, and I know I need to start thinking about these things, even though they're very young. But no, nothing at the moment. But I just want to thank you for your time. Thank everyone for coming tonight. The recording should be up on our YouTube page within a week or so. And I can send out those slides once Kristen sends them to me. So thank you, Kristen. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Have a great night.